it's time to get started. So I want to welcome you all to this webinar tonight, and thank you for joining this Georgia Native Plant Society event, where our mission is championing the stewardship and conservation of Georgia's native plants and their habitats. So my name is Michael Cowan. I am the chairman for the state organization, but also an active member of the North Metro chapter and the education committee there, and that is who is bringing you this webinar tonight. For the introduction tonight, so Dr. Tallamy's impact really can't be overstated. Reading his book was what made the whole issue click for me, reading his first book. Because I've always been involved in nature and sustainability, but it wasn't until I did that, until I thought, oh, well, this actually makes sense. And the key was that he made it simple. It's easy enough for anybody to understand. So I hope that will come through in tonight's presentation. So he is a professor for a few more weeks or months at the University of Delaware, we just heard. But the interesting thing is his background is he's an entomologist, so he's a bug guy, not necessarily a plant guy. So he might talk about that stuff too. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tallamy.
All right, thanks very much, Michael. Yeah, we're going to talk about Chickadee's Guide to Gardening. Really, we're talking about how to make our landscapes bird-friendly, our neighborhoods bird-friendly. Before we do that, though, let's talk about my grandchildren, four of whom live in Portland, Oregon. And Portland, of course, the people who live in Portland consider it the greenest city of the country. They're all environmentally conscious, energy conscious. They've got the biggest city park, forest park in the country, they claim anyway. So Portland is green. But when we go to visit our grandchildren, I noticed that the street trees in Portland are not native trees. They seem to be from every other place. So we've got Callery pears, Alcova, ginkgo, very common as street trees. We've got trees from Europe, Norway maple, little leaf linden, horse chestnut, a lot of trees from the east, like sycamore and red oak, sweet gum, all very common in Portland. So when my oldest granddaughter got to be 8 years old, I said, let's measure this. Let's see what the percentage of native trees in Portland really is. So I gave her a clipboard and we walked around. I called out the trees. She wrote it down. And it turned out that we surveyed 1,176 trees. 100 of them were indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, but 1,076 were not, which means 91.5% of the street trees in what is supposed to be our greenest city were non-native. So it's a great example. Portland is a great example of how to create an attractive city. There are a lot of plants, but one with very few breeding birds and butterflies and pollinators. They do have birds. They've got scrub jays. They've got crows, because those two species are good at living on human garbage. They've got some robins, which can reproduce off the worms that are in your lawn. But there's a whole bunch of birds that could breed in Portland, but very few of them actually do, like the spotted towhee, the white-breasted nuthatch, red-breasted nuthatch, song sparrow, black-headed grosbeak. These are all residents in the area that can't breed there because there's not enough food. Downy woodpecker, hairy woodpecker, pileated woodpecker, Lewis's woodpecker, the red-breasted sapsucker, ruby-crowned kinglet, golden-crowned kinglet, western bluebird, varied thrush, western tanager, black-throated gray. Whole diversity of birds could be there. Brown creeper, the bush tit, black-capped chickadee, chestnut-backed chickadee, Buick's wren, junco. A lot of birds could be breeding in Portland, but they don't because there's simply not enough food in the springtime. So much of Portland, our greenest city, is a biological desert. And it's not a desert because it's a city. It's a desert because it is landscaped with the wrong plants. And I don't want to pick on Portland. That just happens to be where my grandkids live. I could go to just about any city in the country and come up with very similar data. We've got 135 million acres of residential landscapes in the U.S. That are just like Portland. Now, this doesn't need to be a disaster if we learn how to share our properties with other living things, and we do that by using the right plants. I am going to focus on birds, because if we landscape for birds, which are now our charismatic megafauna, then we're landscaping for very functional ecosystems, because you don't have birds if you don't have functional ecosystems, particularly functional food webs. And because of the title, we will follow a chickadee through its life cycle, starting with the spring. Chickadees, of course, are cavity nesters. They're going to nest in the holes in trees. Not just any hole, though. They're particularly bad at this hole is too big. If they did make a nest in here, raccoons and other things could reach right in and grab the babies. This looks pretty good, but yeah, it looks good. But it's also good for titmice, which are a little bit bigger, and they will expel the chickadee. So he's going to look around. This is a little bit better because it's too small for a titmouse. So okay, we're going to use this one. There are 85 species of North American birds that are cavity nesters. So if we want to encourage birds in our neighborhood, we want to leave snags every chance we get. Tough to leave a snag that's leaning over your house, but if you do have a chance to do it, I mean, look at the number of holes that are supporting birds in there. Now, you can keep snags right in your neighborhood, but it doesn't have to be very tall. And this is what's happening particularly in Texas. They've got the very tall loblolly pines, but they cut them down about 15 feet from the base, and then they leave that. And it's in very short order. Birds like the brown-headed nuthatch will carve out a hole and breed in those. There's no threat of that tree falling over on anything. So it is possible to leave snags in our neighborhoods, and it will help a lot of birds. All of these species are cavity nesters. And of course, we can encourage cavity nesters by putting up artificial boxes as well. And all of these species will use artificial boxes. So that's very encouraging. All right, you've got your nest, or you've got your nest hole. Now it's time to build the nest. Now it turns out that chickadees like hair. They like horsehair in particular. They'll pull the hairs out of a horse's tail and build their nest in it. So you can tie a horse up in your front yard, and the chickadee will use its tail. They also like cat hair. So what you can do is brush your cat and put the hair out on the back porch. You want to put the hair out on the back porch, not the cat, because well, chickadees do love the hair, but the cats love the birds. There's 2 to 3 billion birds killed by cats in North America every year. Huge problem. It's almost a third of the North American bird population killed by our domestic cats. So if you do put the hair out there, it's fun to watch the chickadees. They try to twirl it around and make a little ball out of it like this. Then they'll fly off to their nest. It's also a good way of finding out where the nest is. You can see them flying, go right where they are. Cattail fluff is another good source of little, the lining for chickadees' nests. So you can also put up these. We used to call them punkies as kids. Or you can buy a hairball from Wild Birds Unlimited. Lots of ways to get hair into the chickadee's nest. Okay, they built their nest now. They're going to lay their eggs. They'll incubate the eggs, and of course, then the eggs are going to hatch, and the chickadee has to feed those babies. We're talking about the Carolina chickadee, by the way. That's the chickadee you have in Georgia. That's the chickadee I have in southeast Pennsylvania. But all the chickadee species in the country are pretty much the same. And one of the things they do is they go to our feeder and they eat seeds. But baby chickadees cannot eat seeds. Most baby birds cannot eat seeds at all. It turns out that 96% of our terrestrial birds are rearing their young on insects, not on seeds. So we have to provide those insects if we're going to have breeding birds in our yards. Chickadees in particular they'll eat other arthropods, but if they're in a healthy environment, they will focus on caterpillars. And it turns out that, again, they're not exceptions. I had a grad student, Ashley Kennedy, a couple of years ago, put out a call to birders across the country, bird photographers in particular, asking them to take pictures of birds as they were bringing food to the nest. And Ashley was going to identify the species of insects that that the birds were bringing back to the nest and see what the percentage of prey items were that were caterpillars. And it turns out that in 16 out of the 20 common bird families in North America, and she got thousands of pictures, by the way, 16 out of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So if we landscape in a way that doesn't include a lot of caterpillars, we're going to lose breeding birds. And it's one of the pieces of evidence that we have that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. Dan Jansen calls them the meat and potatoes, or the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs. We have to landscape in a way that produces the caterpillars because so many other creatures depend on them. What is special about caterpillars? Several things special about caterpillars. And one of them is that they're soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton. It's made of chitin. It's undigestible. And because they're soft, the birds can stuff them down the throat of their offspring without fear of injuring them. And if you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. The beak's like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. So some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to get 200 aphids or catch one caterpillar? They are nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and many beetles have really sharp edges too. And then finally, it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. And I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates, and we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants, and we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. Well, chickadees can't make their own carotenoids. They're vertebrates, so they have to get them from plants, but they're not eating plants, particularly when they are breeding. So they have to get them from something that does eat plants, and that something, of course, is insects, but not just any insect. If you look at the carotenoid content of different bird prey items, it turns out that caterpillars have far more carotenoids than other types of bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars here. The moths and butterflies themselves, they have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. It's the caterpillars that eat the green leaves. And here's the earthworm way down here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. There's also a direct correlation between how often a prey item is brought back to the nest and its carotenoid content. Caterpillars are brought back more often than anything else, and they have the highest carotenoid content. Followed by orthopteroids, things like crickets and grasshoppers and katydids. And then everything else with very low carotenoid contents is not brought back very often. So those studies and others are suggesting that caterpillars are not optional parts of most bird diets. They are essential parts of most bird diets. So let's just say most birds need caterpillars, which means there can be no chickadees where we don't have enough caterpillars. So that is the next question. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? It's a good question. And the answer is it takes a lot. I discovered this in my own backyard when I was just trying to get a picture of chickadees bringing food to the nest. And the first thing I noticed is they bring a lot of food to the nest. They'll bring in caterpillars once every 3 minutes because both the male and the female are working together to forage for food. In one 27-minute of watching them, they brought in 30 caterpillars. How do they do that? By bringing in more than one at a time, and sometimes a whole bunch at a time. And they're doing this all day long, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So they're working very hard. Now, the next question is, how many species of caterpillars do the chickadees bring to their nest? Well, in 3 hours of watching them, they brought back 17 different species of caterpillars. Why is this important? Well, if I had only 1 or 2 species of caterpillars in my yard, and it happened to be a bad year for those species, there wouldn't be nearly enough caterpillars for the chickadee to actually complete its reproduction. But if I have 17 species or 34 species or 134 species, and actually that got me into counting the number of species of caterpillars that I have in my yard, and I am still doing that. This is at least 10 years later. And I'm up to 1,366 moth species in my yard. So there's plenty of species, even if it's a bad year for particular species, plenty of food for that chickadee to complete its development. This is where diversity creates stability. You want diversity because not all species will be common at the same time. And certainly 1,366 moth species is a diverse caterpillar community. But I'm not done. Every year I get more. So the community is either growing or I just haven't measured them all at this point. So a chickadee pair brings back between 390 and 570 caterpillars to the nest every single day. That was measured by a guy named Richard Brewer way back in 1961. And they're in the nest for 16 days before they fledge. So that means they are feeding their young between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars before they fledge, and that depends on the number of chickadees in the nest. And after they fledge and they're flying all around and nobody's been able to count them, they continue to feed the baby's caterpillars another 21 days. So you're really talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to bring one clutch of chickadees to independence. And of course, after they're independent, they keep eating caterpillars. And that's for a bird that's a third of an ounce, 4 pennies worth of bird. What if I wanted to have a red-bellied woodpecker breeding in my yard? They weigh 8 times more than a chickadee. How many caterpillars does that take? And I don't want just chickadees and red-bellied woodpeckers. I want a whole diversity of birds. I want scarlet tanagers. I want titmice. I want blue jays. I want bluebirds and tree swallows and common yellowthroats and indigo bunnings and towhees and yellow warblers and wood thrushes and wrens, cardinals, hummingbirds. All of these guys should be in my yard. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, hummingbirds don't eat caterpillars. Actually, yeah, they don't eat a lot of caterpillars, but they do eat a lot of insects. 80% of a hummingbird's diet is insects when they're rearing their young. You don't make a new hummingbird out of sugar water. So insects are extremely important in terms of bird reproduction, and caterpillars are leading the way. This is a list of the bird families in North America that are rearing their young on insects. So I can just generalize and say no caterpillars, no baby birds. It is a generalization, but it's a pretty good one. So what types of landscapes are capable of producing the diversity and the number of insects required to have breeding birds? So if we're going to answer this question, we have to consider the specialized relationships that insects have with plants. Remember, plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. Excuse me. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. Only a few insects can only eat the types of plants for which they have adaptations that allow them to get around those chemical defenses. About 90% of our insects are host plant specialists. They have evolved specialized adaptations like enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify defensive compounds, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. But once all those adaptations fall into place, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant lineage, and that's what host plant specialization is all about. If you take away that plant lineage, you lose that insect. And I'm going to use the monarch butterfly as a good example because everybody knows that the monarch is a specialist on milkweeds. And most people know that milkweeds are toxic plants. They're filled with cardiac glycosides. Don't eat a lot of milkweeds or it'll stop your heart. It does not stop the monarch's heart. And they do have a heart, by the way, because they've got the physiology, the enzymes to store and excrete and detoxify those compounds. What about the sticky latex sap? That's also a defense in milkweeds that gives it its common name. If you break open a vein, all this white goo comes out. And when it's exposed to air, it turns into it gels. It's like a gum, a chewing gum, and it glues a caterpillar's mouth part shut. And then the caterpillar starves to death. So how does a monarch get around the sticky latex sap? Well, you can watch this right in your yard. It's really obvious on common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. If you watch the caterpillar crawl onto a new leaf, go to the end of the leaf and it starts to eat. And if any latex sap comes out at all, it'll stop eating right away, turn around, go back up the leaf, maybe 2/3 of the way, and then it starts to chew through the midrib. And it chews till it has completely severed the midrib. And what it's done is sever the canals that shunt the latex sap from this part of the leaf to this part of the leaf. So now this part of the leaf has no more latex in it. So the caterpillar can turn around, go back down, and it can eat the leaf without any latex sap coming out at all. It's a very simple behavioral adaptation that most other insects have not figured out how to do. That does flag the leaves. So if you're looking for monarchs, you can actually drive down the road and look at a milkweed patch. If you see flag leaves, you know that monarch caterpillars are there. So that's the upside of specialization. The monarch can now eat a plant that is toxic to most other insects. As a matter of fact, it now depends on that plant. The downside of specialization is that now that's all monarchs can eat. Out of the 2,137 plant genera in North America, native plant genera, I should say, monarchs can only eat one, Asclepias. That is host plant specialization. And if we take away the milkweeds, of course, we lose the monarchs. And that's exactly what we've done, particularly in the agricultural belts of the Midwest. We've turned the weedy road verges along agriculture into lawn and gotten rid of tens of thousands of miles of milkweed patches and other things that monarchs need. So we need to put the milkweeds back because of host plant specialization. And the important point I want to make here is that 90% of the insects that eat plants are specialists just like monarchs. We need the plants they specialize on so that you can make the caterpillars so that the chickadee can eat. So this is how you can actually create a food web in your yard if you understand about host plant specialization. Let's do that for the white-eyed vireo. And I chose the white-eyed vireo because that's the nest that my wife found in our yard. Now, the vireos knew that I wanted to take pictures of what they were bringing back to the nest. So they built their nest really low, and I could do it easily. So this is a blinded sphinx moth. It's a specialist on black cherry. We have a lot of black cherry in our yard, and the babies get to eat. This is the chestnut schizura. It's a specialist on arrowwood viburnum. We have a lot of that, and the babies get to eat again. This is the drab prominent, a specialist on sycamore. I didn't plant any sycamore, but there was a windstorm shortly after we moved in, blew in sycamore seeds from someplace, and they germinated. Now we got a good crop of sycamores making drab prominence, so the babies get to eat again. This is the eight-spotted forester moth, a specialist on native grapes. We've got that. The lunate zale, another specialist on black cherry. The spicebush swallowtail has little eyes on its prothorax to try to scare the bird into thinking it's a tree snake. Didn't work this time. It's a specialist on spicebush and sassafras. They're actually closely related plants. This is the tufted bird dropping moth, another specialist on black cherry. So black cherry is emerging as a really important host plant for the white-eyed vireo. But these guys are hungry. They need a lot more than that. So let's put some black walnut in the landscape. If we do, we get the walnut sphinx, the gray-edged boma loca, the black blotch caesura, the bride, all specialists on black walnut. If we put in native maples, we get Plagodes inchworms, the green striped maple worm, the maple phantom bantam. Another caterpillar on maple. The phantom maple band. If we have native elms, you get the four-horned sphinx, the double-toothed prominent, the interrupted dagger moth. So remember, 90% of the insects that eat our plants are only going to be there for that chickadee if you plant the plants that those insects co-evolved with. So if you want the mustard sallow, you need witch hazel. If you want the hackberry emperor, you need hackberry. If you want Cuculio asteroides, you need native asters. If you want the Arcidra flower moth, the brown-hooded owlet, you need goldenrod. The hog sphinx, the Pandora sphinx, the abbot sphinx all need Virginia creeper. Redbud leaf roller needs redbud. The gray furcula needs native willows. The turbulene phosphylla needs greenbrier. And the orange tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the medium dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red line panapoda, and the laugher, and many, many more all need oaks, so that we can have that viable food web in our yards. And it turns out that oaks are the very best plants where we live, particularly in Georgia, in terms of making caterpillars. They support more than 1,000 caterpillar species nationwide and hundreds in Georgia. Why do we need all these caterpillars? It's not just birds that need the caterpillars and the insects. All spiders eat insects, or they eat other spiders that ate insects. And I know a lot of gardeners don't like spiders, but look who does. It's the second most important component of bird food webs, including the chickadee. So we need our spiders just for the birds. There are a lot of other insect predators that eat insect herbivores, so we need them as well. Frogs eat insects, toads eat insects, salamanders eat insects, skinks eat insects, all the lizards eat insects, our bats eat insects, our rodents eat insects, our larger mammals eat insects, like possums, skunks, possums, raccoons, foxes. 25% of a fox's diet is insects. 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. Doesn't matter how big you are, you need insects. And even if you don't eat insects, you need insects. This is the sharp-shinned hawk, and it's a bird predator. But the birds it's eating needed insects to become birds. This is a garter snake, and it eats the frogs and toads, but they wouldn't be here without the insects. So they indirectly need our insects. Point is, a world without insects is a world without biological diversity, and a world without biological diversity is a world without humans. And we humans need to wake up and hear that call very, very soon. And of course, it was Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson, that told us how important insects were, and he did it decades ago when he said insects are the little things that run the world. Way back in 1987, he wrote a paper that told us what would happen if insects disappear. If insects disappeared, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, it would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And again, humans wouldn't survive the loss of insects. So they are, life as we know it depends on insects. That's the message here. Unfortunately, we've ignored E.O. Wilson's warnings, his wisdom, and we've had this undeclared war on insects forever. And it's one of the reasons that we see headlines like this. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, E.O. told us what it means for the rest of life on Earth. 22% decline in our butterflies just since the year 2000, and they weren't doing so well in the year 2000 either. The UN saying we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years, and they said it 3 years ago. So now it's the next 17 years. That's a prediction. It hasn't happened yet, and we have to make very sure that it doesn't happen because these are the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. They produce the life support that keeps humans alive. Of course, if we lose our insects, we're going to lose our birds as well. 432 species of North American birds are at risk of extinction, not because there's only 3 or 4 left, but because of their trajectory of declines. We now have 3 billion fewer breeding birds today than we had just 45 years ago. So that's not looking really good. I think our only viable option is to learn how to live in ecological harmony with the natural world that supports us. And the only way to do that is to create a world that has the insects that the food webs require so that we can have biodiversity in our yard. Let's talk about what causes insect declines. Dave Wagner, University of Connecticut, says it's death by 1,000 cuts because there's so many major causes of insect declines. The misuse and overuse of pesticides, the forever, always present habitat loss, the use of non-native ornamentals that don't support the insects. They become an invasive species in our natural areas and they don't support the insects. Security lights are killing insects. Climate change is killing insects. But you know what? This is actually good news because these 5 can be addressed by individuals right at home. Changing climate change right at home is a little bit harder. So we'll just focus on these. Let's talk about invasive plants. Where do they come from? They're the ornamental plants that we have bought at the nursery and put in our yards. And an invasive plant, what is that? It's a non-native plant that has escaped our cultivation and is displacing the native plants that support the life around us. And our natural areas have been invaded by 3,300 species of introduced plants. Not all of them are terrible like kudzu, but many of them are really serious and invasives. This is what a natural area near me looks like. Multiflora rose and oriental bittersweet, Japanese honeysuckle, autumn olive, bush honeysuckle. All the green you see here are invasive plants from Asia because they leaf out before the plants from North America. So early in the spring is a good time to see what your invasive species load is. Of course, you've got an awful lot of privet down there. Now you can measure what happens when you allow the non-native plants to displace the native plant communities. And we've done that several times in our lab. This is a study I like to focus on because it was such a simple one with such a clear result. Took an undergrad, Melissa Richard. We went into hedgerows in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware that were invaded. This one's heavily invaded with autumn olive and multiflora rose and other things. and measured the caterpillar communities in those hedgerows in standardized ways and compared it to the caterpillar community in hedgerows that were not invaded. So the trick in this study was finding hedgerows that were not invaded. But we found when they're invaded, there's a 68% reduction in the number of species of caterpillars, a 91% reduction in the abundance of those caterpillars, and a 96% reduction in the biomass, the amount of energy that those caterpillars bring to those hedgerows. So if you're thinking of caterpillars as bird food, that's a 96% reduction in the bird food in the hedgerows. It's no secret why our birds are declining. What if I said to you, introduced plants have reduced your bank account by 96%? My guess is that would get your attention because we know how important our bank accounts are. Well, insects are the currency in our ecological bank account. And it's our ecological bank account that keeps us alive. That bank account is also important, and we have to pay attention to this important problem. It's not the presence of introduced plants. All of these guys are introduced plants that destroys ecosystems. It is the absence of the native plants that support them. So if we increase the amount of productive natives in our yards like this, then we actually can have viable food webs and biodiversity in our yards. Let's think about what we have to do to a landscape like this to turn it into a viable habitat. Why are we thinking about that? Because most of the country is privately owned. 85.6% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned, and it looks just like the pictures I just showed you. Conservation has to succeed on private property if we're going to succeed at all. And by the way, we have to succeed because failure is not going to be pretty. So this is how we've chosen our plants in the past. It's been for their aesthetic properties. You know, do they have decorative value? Could be screens and anchors or focal points, but it's all been about their aesthetic value. No thought into the ecological value of our plants. And when we choose plants based only on aesthetics, we can create beautiful landscapes. But those beautiful landscapes aren't supporting anything, and that means it's ecological destruction. We have to raise the bar about what we're asking our landscapes to do. There are 4 critically important ecological goals that all landscapes have. One is to support a food web. If you don't support a food web, you have no animals in your landscape, and if you have no animals, you do not have a functional ecosystem. All landscapes have to sequester carbon to help climate change. All landscapes have to manage the watershed in which they lie, and all landscapes have to support pollinators. So we can choose plants that are good at doing all those things. We don't have to give up the decorative value, but we can balance the criteria for choosing plants, find ones that support food webs, that are also pretty, that protect watersheds, that store carbon, that create pollinator habitat, that do all kinds of things. And when we add function to the criteria used to select our plants, then landscaping equals ecological restoration. This is a picture of my mother-in-law's house. When they built this house, and it wasn't that long ago, it was a cornfield. So it doesn't take long to put productive plants back into your yard. Which plants should we be sure to have in our landscapes? We want to make sure that at least some of those plants are what I call keystone plants, because just a few plants, 14% of our native plants, are making 90% of the caterpillars that drive those food webs. Those are the keystone plants I'm talking about. And I call them keystone plants because of what keystones do. Remember the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle. If you take it out of the middle, then the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they're making most of the food. Ginkgos, nice ornamental plant, good fall color, but they produce 0 caterpillars. Not a keystone plant. Oaks are the best keystone plant across the country. In 84% of the counties in which they occur, they support more than 1,000 species of caterpillars in the U.S. And by the way, Georgia is one of the centers of diversity of oaks in this country. Native prunus, very high, 456 species of caterpillars just in the mid-Atlantic state on our native prunus. Zelkova, which is it's an ornamental brought in from Europe because it looks like, or from Asia, looks like the American elms that we lost to the Dutch elm disease, but it supports no caterpillars. And by the way, there's good evidence that it's now escaping and becoming an important invasive. Pieris japonica used to be the most important foundation plant, most common. Well, that's, of course, a non-native Pieris. We do have a native Pieris, only supports 2 species of caterpillars. It could be a blueberry that supports 294 species. Native viburnum supports 118 species. English ivy supports nothing. These are all the invasives that we're dealing with. Crepe myrtle, we love our crepe myrtles, but they're not going to make any caterpillars for you. So if you want to know the very best plants where you live, you go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the very best woody plant genera and herbaceous plant genera in your county will pop up. It's going to look very similar to this for most areas in Georgia. And these are abbreviated lists because I ran out of room. But now you know where you can find out about what plants to plant. And of course, the Georgia Native Plant Society has all this information as well. So try to think of your plants as if they were bird feeders. So there you go. They're bird feeders. Now you get to decide how well you're going to feed the birds. You can feed them a lot, or you can feed them just a little bit. You can put food in your bird feeders, or you can keep them empty. There's the ginkgo back there. It's a big tree, but it's not making any food for the birds. Okay, now it's fall. We have already made it through the breeding season. It's fall, and we're still trying to take care of our chickadee. In the old days, we had a lot of eastern meadows around. There actually was substantial areas that were called eastern prairie, making lots and lots of seeds for our overwintering birds. Those areas are mostly gone at this point. But that doesn't mean we still can't make seeds for the birds. By not deadheading our ornamental plants. Things like black-eyed Susan, the chickadees will hang from that and they'll get seeds all winter long. So black-eyed Susans and New York ironweed and pasture thistle and Joe Pye weed and evening primrose, these are just a few of the plants that are making seeds that birds use all winter long if we don't deadhead them. Goldenrod, another one. But of course, we do feed the birds. We put out seed. And the chickadees do use this. They switch from insects. They're not feeding their babies anymore. If you've ever watched a chickadee at a bird feeder, it doesn't behave like a house finch that just sits there and eats seed after seed after seed. The chickadees are very wary, looking around. It'll take a seed, but it doesn't eat it. It's going to go hide it. It's got to figure out where it's going to hide it. Yeah, there he goes. He's going to hide it in a nook or a cranny that you have left on your property. This is pretty good. You can stick it under the bark here, but this is even better. I'm going to hide it in this hole. There you go, in the hole. But Mr. Blue Jay is watching, and that's a problem because blue jays are very good at stealing food that chickadees hide. He thinks there's a seed in there. Yes, there is, and he has stolen it. So the chickadee has to find another place. But all fall long, they are taking the seeds out of your feeder and they are hiding them so they can use them later on the winter. They don't know that you're going to keep your feeder up there all winter long, so they're just trying to plan for the future. The real question is, how do the chickadees remember where the seeds are? I can't remember where my phone is when it's in my hand. But these guys are very good at remembering for months, and they do that by growing their brains. They grow the hippocampus, the memory part of their brain, about 30% in the fall, and it stores the memory of where those seeds are hidden. And then in the spring, after they've eaten them all, the brain shrinks again, the hippocampus shrinks, and they get stupid. Why is that? Well, brains are really expensive energetically, and you don't want to have a bigger brain and be smarter than you need to be because it takes a lot of energy to do that. There you go. Chickadees grow their brains in the fall, and that study was done by these guys. So the point here is to make sure that your landscape does have areas where chickadees and titmice and other birds are actually hiding food for the winter. What about the poor blue jays? Don't worry about the blue jays. They're getting the acorns from all the oaks that you're going to plant. They have a mutualistic relationship with oaks. They certainly use the acorns for winter food, but they also allow the oaks to move farther and faster than any other deciduous tree in the world. This is how that happens. Jays don't cache acorns. In other words, they're not putting a whole bunch in one place. They bury them singly. So they'll pick up an acorn, they'll fly up to a mile, sometimes a mile and a half from the parent tree before they tap that acorn below the surface of the soil. There they go, tap it below. And then they're going to go get it in the wintertime. Particularly in a mast year, a single jay can bury up to 4,500 acorns. They can carry more than one at a time, but they're only going to put them in one place at a time. But they only remember where 1 out of 4 acorns is. So a single jay is actually planting 3,360 oak trees each year. And if they do that a mile from the parent tree, they're dispersing those acorns farther and faster than any other acorn disperser. After insects have declined in our yards, the birds are going to switch to high-fat fruits and seeds, but they really, really like the high-fat fruits, like the fruits on poison ivy, by the way. I know we don't like our poison ivy, but it's a really valuable winter plant for birds. Um, the key here is that not all fruits are equal in their fat content. Fat is really important, protein less so, because it's the fat that gets birds through their migration and the fat that gets birds through uh, the coldest parts of the winter. Susan Smith Pagano has done a lot of work looking at the fat content of native plants versus non-native plants. And in general, native plants like wax myrtle and viburnums and spicebush and native cornus, native dogwoods, and Virginia creeper. These guys all have high levels of fat, some of them almost 50% fat, really valuable sources of food. Whereas multiflora rose, the various honeysuckles, buckthorn, autumn olive, oriental bittersweet, really low amounts of fat. 1% and 2%. Most of them, these berries are high in sugar, which is not going to help the birds in the fall or the winter time. So it's really looking like she's continuing to do her work, but the introduced berry producers that are out there are phenologically out of sync with the needs of our birds. They're producing high sugar berries in the fall instead of in the summer. And you might say, well, why are the birds eating those berries? Because it's the only thing there. When you have a bush honeysuckle invasion, for example, or a privet invasion, they push back out all the other berry makers, and that's the only berry that's there, so the birds will eat what is available. Okay, wintertime, tough time for the birds. Um, Remember, 50% of a chickadee's diet in the winter is seeds, but the other 50% is insects and spiders. So we have to have landscapes that still have a lot of insects and spiders even in the wintertime. If you look up in your trees in the wintertime, you'll often see the birds flitting around. Looks like they're playing, but they're not. They're foraging. What are they foraging for? They're foraging for insects, but we all know there's no insects in the trees in the wintertime. So what's going on? And particularly the kinglet paradox. This is the golden crown kinglet. It's a bird that should have migrated because it's an insectivore. It doesn't need any seeds at all winter long. I took this picture in my backyard when it was snowing. So why doesn't the kinglet migrate where the insects are? That's called the kinglet paradox. Bernheinrich is a wonderful naturalist, actually an entomologist who doesn't like paradoxes, and he actually looked in the crops of golden crown kinglets in Maine in January, and he found they were full of caterpillars in Maine in January. And the reason we didn't think there were any caterpillars up there is because they look just like sticks. They are pretending to be sticks, and of course we fell for it. The birds don't fall for it though. When it gets really cold, the caterpillar shrinks a little bit. It got proteins in their cells that it's like antifreeze, keeps the caterpillar from bursting. And when it gets warmer, they swell up a little bit, but they just sit there all winter long. So there's plenty of food for the chickadees to eat. What we need to do is plant trees that are good at keeping the caterpillars around in the wintertime and in the summertime. And they're the same kinds of trees, those keystone plants we talked about. A good reason to keep your goldenrod around is that the goldenrod gall fly produces these swellings. You've all seen them. If you cut it open, there's a juicy little fly maggot in there. And it's just full of protein and fat, and it can keep a chickadee alive in the wintertime on a cold night, and it may not make it otherwise. This is what the fly looks like when it emerges in the summertime. But chickadees know there's good food in there, and they will pound away at it so that by springtime, most of those galls have been opened up and the fly larva has been consumed. Chickadees do that. Titmice do it. Downy woodpeckers do it. Very valuable winter source of food. So keep your goldenrod around. It's why you don't level your meadow in the fall. And how about those bagworms? Nobody likes bagworms except the chickadees. What a wonderful package of food for a chickadee. It's hard for them to get in there, but when they do, it's a big meal. The female bagworm is almost the size of the bag, and it can keep a chickadee going for a long time. So the question is, can landscapes like these, the typical residential landscapes, support all the interactions we just talked about? And the answer, of course, is no. We got 44 million acres of lawn out there. It's an area larger than New England that doesn't do any of those four ecological goals that we talked about. And we're still giving out awards for the lawn of the month. You know, who you get an award for the who can have the deadest landscape. It's a lost opportunity. Roy Dennis is a conservationist in England, and he recognized this. He said, land ownership is more than a privilege, it's a responsibility. This is planet Earth, and the biosphere is just a thin film around the outside of the planet. If this were an egg, it would be thinner than the eggshell. That's where all the life on Earth exists, and it could be all the life in the universe. It's certainly all the life we're ever going to interact with. So we, as landowners, have the responsibility of keeping all the life in the universe around. It's an awesome responsibility. I drive by this church in Mississippi, and it strikes me that, you know, on Sunday people come and worship God's creations in the church, and on the outside they're killing them all the time. They're just not thinking about it. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live, and if you do, it empowers you. More and more people recognize that the Earth has some serious ecological problems, and they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can change their light bulbs. That's a major source of insect decline. One person can remove their invasive plants. One person can use keystone plants. If you hire Mosquito Joe, it's killing all the insects in your yard, not just mosquitoes. And then your chickadee has nothing to eat. There's all kinds of things that one person can do to increase the ecological integrity of their piece of the earth and then enhance their greater local ecosystem instead of continuing to degrade it. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. It's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They'll love you as a volunteer. Recently, Robert Swan said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. It's not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you. Going to be you. And if you do it, if we plant for chickadees, we can save many of our fellow earthlings right at home.